Her hands moved with practiced precision over the rifle, checking every component with methodical care despite the blistering desert heat. Captain Alexandra Morgan knew this weapon better than most people knew their own reflection. A Barrett M82 sniper rifle that had been her constant companion through 3 deployments. The rest of Echo Team was gearing up for the Convoy intercept mission, their excitement palpable as they prepared for what promised to be a career-defining operation. But Alexandra had just received orders that made her blood boil. She was staying behind at the observation post while the men moved forward. As the team's most experienced sniper watched the others prepare to leave, none of them realized that before sunrise, her lone shot would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Major Peterson's voice cut through the tension in the command tent, his finger jabbing at the satellite imagery spread across the tactical table. Intelligence confirms the HVT will be in the 3rd vehicle. We have 1 shot at this, people. 1 shot to take down the man responsible for the bombing in Karachi. The 6 members of Echo Team leaned forward, studying the projected route through the mountain pass. Captain Alexandra Morgan, call sign Phantom, maintained her usual composed silence while analyzing the terrain. 10 years as a special operations sniper had taught her that observation preceded action, always. "Sir, the convoy will be most vulnerable here," Lieutenant Jacob West said, pointing to a narrow section of road flanked by steep cliffs. "We can establish blocking positions and force them to stop." Peterson nodded approvingly. "Good, you'll lead the ground element. What about aerial surveillance?" asked Sergeant Mills, the team's communications specialist. "Negative. Cloud cover and the enemy's anti-aircraft capabilities make that too risky. This has to be ground-based." Peterson's gaze swept the room before settling on Alexandra. "Captain Morgan, you'll maintain position at Observation Post Delta. We need eyes on the high ground." The silence that followed felt heavier than her. Full combat load. Alexandra kept her expression neutral despite the disappointment coursing through her. Op Delta was 5 kilometers from the ambush site, essential for surveillance, but completely removed from the action. "Sir, with respect, I should be with the intercept team," she said, her voice calm but firm. "My marksmanship scores are the highest in the unit. If something goes wrong, you'll need precision fire support." Peterson's expression hardened. "The decision's been made, Captain. We need your expertise on Overwatch. Lieutenant West will handle tactical command of the ground element." West couldn't quite hide his satisfied smile. The lieutenant had made little effort to conceal his resentment since Alexandra had been assigned to Echo Team 6 months ago. His voice carried just enough volume to ensure she heard him as he leaned towards Sergeant Torres. "Overwatch is where she belongs anyway. Women don't belong in direct action." Alexandra caught the comment, but let it slide off her like rain. She'd heard worse throughout her career as one of the few women in special operations. The opinions of men like West mattered far less than the mission. After the briefing, the team dispersed to prepare their gear. Alexandra methodically checked her Barrett, breaking it down and reassembling it with practiced efficiency. Each component was inspected, cleaned, and tested before being returned to its proper place. The ritual was as much psychological as practical, a way of controlling what she could in a world where so many decisions were made for her. Sergeant Torres approached as she finished reassembling the bolt carrier group. Unlike West, Torres had never questioned her abilities, perhaps because they'd served together in Helmand Province 2 years earlier. "Hey, Phantom," he said, using her call sign. "Don't take it personally. Peterson's just following protocol." "Is that what we're calling it now?" she replied, not looking up from her weapon. "Protocol?" Torres sighed. "Look, you know West has connections at headquarters. His father is— I know who his father is. Alexandra interrupted. Deputy Director of Operations tends to carry weight around here. She finally looked up. But this isn't about me, Torres. It's about mission effectiveness. Having your best shooter 5 kilometers from the action doesn't make tactical sense. Maybe not, Torres conceded, but those are the orders. Alexandra nodded. In their line of work, orders were orders, regardless of personal feelings. Just make sure West doesn't get tunnel vision. The intelligence puts 7 vehicles in that convoy, and the security detail will be elite. Torres gave her a knowing. Look, you've seen something in the intel that the rest of us missed. It wasn't a question. Alexandra had developed a reputation for noticing details others overlooked, patterns in enemy movement, inconsistencies in reporting, subtle terrain, features that could affect an operation. The convoy has been running decoy operations for the past month, she explained. 3 times they've switched vehicles mid-route. What makes us think this time will be different? I'll keep my eyes open, Torres promised before rejoining. The others. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The sun was setting as Echo Team made final preparations. Alexandra watched them load into 2 modified SUVs, their movements efficient and practiced. Despite her frustration, she felt a surge of pride. They were among the best operators in the Special Forces community, even West with his arrogance. Peterson approached as the team was mounting up. Up Delta gives you line of sight to the entire valley, Captain. If anything looks off, anything at all, you call it in immediately. Alexandra nodded. Understood, sir. And Morgan, he added, his voice softer, this isn't a reflection on your capabilities. You're the only one I trust to see the bigger picture from up there. It was cold comfort, but she appreciated the gesture. I won't let you down, sir. Never thought you would. Peterson climbed into the lead vehicle, and moments later, both SUVs disappeared into the gathering darkness. The journey to Observation Post Delta took Alexandra just under an hour, moving silently through rocky terrain, illuminated only by stars and a sliver of moon. The post itself was little more than a natural depression atop a ridge, offering concealment, while providing an unobstructed view of the valley below. She settled into position, unpacking her equipment with practiced efficiency. The night vision scope attached to her Barrett turned the darkness into shades of green, revealing the winding road where the convoy would appear in approximately 4 hours. Alexandra established her hide with the same attention to detail that characterized everything she did, creating a stable shooting platform, arranging her equipment for silent access, calculating distances to potential targets, and noting environmental factors that could affect bullet trajectory. For the next 3 hours, she maintained vigilant observation, REPORTING periodic status updates through encrypted communications. Echo Team had gone silent once they reached their ambush positions, standard procedure to minimize the risk of detection. It was during the final hour of her watch that Alexandra noticed the first anomaly, a subtle disturbance in the pattern of shadows, along a secondary road that didn't appear on their tactical maps. She adjusted her scope, focusing on the area. 2 kilometers east of the primary route. Overwatch to command, possible movement on uncharted route, grid reference Tango-Echo-3-9er. Request confirmation. Static answered her. Alexandra tried again, changing frequencies according to protocol, but the result was the same. Either distance and terrain were blocking transmission, or someone was jamming their communications. Neither option boded well for the operation. Alexandra quickly calculated her options. Protocol dictated maintaining position and continuing attempts to re-establish communications. The alternative was abandoning her post to investigate, potentially compromising the mission if her suspicions proved unfounded. The decision crystallized when she caught the unmistakable glint of metal reflecting starlight, vehicles moving with headlights off, using night vision for navigation. The convoy wasn't approaching from the expected western route, but from the east, bypassing Echo Team's carefully planned ambush entirely. Alexandra checked her watch. There wasn't time to reach her team and warn them, not on foot through treacherous mountain terrain. They would be waiting for a convoy that would never arrive, while the real target slipped past them undetected. Unless she acted. She calculated the distance to the moving convoy, approximately 1,800 meters, well within the effective range of her Barrett. The wind was minimal, temperature stable. Conditions for a shot were nearly ideal. But stopping an entire convoy alone violated every tactical principle they operated under. The memory of Karachi flashed through her mind, the school destroyed, children buried under rubble, families shattered by senseless violence. All because of the man reportedly traveling in that convoy. Alexandra made her decision. She would take the shot. She shifted position, orienting toward the approaching vehicles. Through her scope, she counted 7, the same number expected on the primary route. The formation was tight, professional. These weren't random fighters but highly trained security personnel. Experience told her the high-value target would be in the middle vehicle, protected on all sides. But Alexandra had studied this target. For weeks, the intelligence had mentioned his superstition, his insistence on always traveling in the same vehicle, third from the front. It was the kind of detail others dismissed as irrelevant, but Alexandra knew that human patterns often proved more reliable than tactical doctrine. She centered her crosshairs on the third vehicle, a heavily armored SUV with tinted windows. At this distance, with this weapon, she could penetrate the armor, but she needed to strike precisely where the reinforcement was weakest, the driver's side window. Alexandra controlled her breathing, establishing the rhythm that had made her the unit's premier marksman. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4, exhale for 4, hold for 4. Her heartbeat slowed. The world narrowed to what she could see through her scope. The convoy rounded a bend in the road, momentarily exposing the profile of the third vehicle. Alexandra made minute adjustments for distance, wind, and the slight incline of the road. Her finger took up the slack in the trigger. Between heartbeats, she fired. The Barrett's recoil slammed into her shoulder as the .50 caliber round tore through the night. Through her scope, Alexandra watched the driver's side window of the third vehicle explode inward. The SUV swerved violently, colliding with the rock face beside the road before coming to an abrupt stop. The vehicles behind it braked sharply, causing a chain reaction of near collisions. Alexandra ejected the spent casing and chambered another round in one fluid motion, already acquiring her next target, the lead security vehicle where guards were now pouring out, weapons raised. Her second shot disabled the lead vehicle's engine block, sending steam billowing into the night air. The third shot struck the rear vehicle's front tire, effectively boxing in the entire convoy. The security team scattered for cover, returning fire in her general direction, but falling well short of her position. They knew a sniper was engaging them, but in the darkness, pinpointing her location was nearly impossible. Alexandra maintained her disciplined fire, targeting vehicle engines and weapon systems rather than personnel. Her goal wasn't to maximize casualties, but to contain the situation until her team could respond. Each shot was deliberate, precise, creating chaos and confusion among the security detail, while preserving their ability to surrender once reinforcements arrived. After the 8th shot, she observed movement from the damaged third vehicle. 2 figures emerged, one supporting the other. Even at this distance, she recognized the distinctive profile of their target from countless intelligence briefings. He was alive but clearly injured, being dragged to cover by his personal guard. Alexandra centered her crosshairs on the pair. The shot was clear, the target confirmed. Her finger tightened on the trigger, then she stopped. Dead, the target was. Just another body. Alive, he was a source of intelligence that could prevent future attacks and dismantle his network. Alexandra adjusted her aim and fired at the ground near their feet, sending them diving behind a nearby rock formation, trapped but alive. For the next 20 minutes, she maintained her position, taking selective shots whenever the security team attempted to regroup or reach their vehicles. Through it all, she continued attempting to re-establish communication with Echo Team. Finally, her radio crackled to life. "Command to Overwatch, status report." Major Peterson's voice was tense. "Overwatch to command. Target convoy intercepted on secondary route, grid, Tango Echo 4-1. HVT is contained, but security element is returning fire. Request immediate support." A moment of silence followed, likely as Peterson processed how she positioned on Overwatch 5 kilometers away, had somehow engaged the convoy his ground team was still waiting for. "Copy Overwatch, hold position. Support inbound, ETA 15 minutes. Alexandra could hear the controlled fury in his voice, but that was a problem for later. Right now, she needed to keep the situation contained until reinforcements arrived. The next 12 minutes were a tactical chess match. The convoy's security detail was professional and determined, attempting to probe her position with coordinated fire while working to extract their principal. Alexandra countered each move with precise fire, herding them back into a defensive posture without inflicting unnecessary casualties. When Echo Team arrived, they executed a textbook envelopment maneuver, approaching from multiple angles with overwhelming firepower. The security detail, already demoralized by Alexandra's relentless accuracy, surrendered after a brief exchange of fire. From her position on the ridge, Alexandra watched through her scope as her teammates secured the area and took custody of the high-value target. Even at this distance, she could read the mixture of confusion and reluctant respect in their body language. She began the methodical process of breaking down her hide, erasing any evidence of her presence, according to training. The Barrett was disassembled and returned to its case with the same care she always showed. Only when everything was secured did she begin the descent to rejoin her team. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten when Alexandra reached the site of the disabled convoy. Echo Team had established a secure perimeter, with the captured security detail flex-cuffed and seated in a controlled group. The high-value target was being treated by their medic, his shoulder bandaged where her initial shot had grazed him. Major Peterson saw her approaching and stepped away from the command vehicle. His expression was unreadable in the pre-dawn light. "Captain Morgan," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "I believe you have a mission report to deliver." Alexandra came to attention. "Sir, after observing suspicious movement on an uncharted route, I attempted to report, but found communications compromised. Visual confirmation identified the target convoy bypassing our position. With no way to alert the team in time, I made the decision to engage to prevent the target's escape." Peterson's jaw tightened. "You engaged a 7-vehicle convoy, alone, against direct orders to maintain your observation position." "Yes, sir." "You fired on a high-value target we've been hunting for 8 months without authorization." "Yes, sir." Peterson stared at her for a long moment. Around them, the rest of Echo Team had gone quiet, watching the exchange while pretending not to. "Your first shot," Peterson finally said. "Walk me through it." Alexandra blinked, not expecting this question. 1,824 meters, sir. Calculated for approximately 2.4 meters of drop due to gravity, with minor adjustments for a 3-knot crosswind. I targeted the driver's side window where the armor would be thinnest, intending to incapacitate rather than kill. The round performed as expected, though the vehicle's collision with the rock face caused more damage than anticipated. Peterson's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "And you maintained fire control for how long before we arrived?" Approximately 22 minutes, sir. 13 confirmed disabling shots, no confirmed casualties. Lieutenant West stepped forward, unable to contain himself any longer. Sir, with all due respect, Captain Morgan directly violated your orders and endangered the entire operation. She should be commended, Peterson interrupted, his voice firm. The convoy changed routes, Lieutenant. If Captain Morgan had followed my orders to the letter, our target would be across the border by now, and we'd be standing in an empty mountain pass, wondering what went wrong. West's face flushed. But sir, but nothing. Peterson cut him off again. While we were watching the wrong road, Captain Morgan identified the threat, adapted to communications failure, and single-handedly contained a situation that would have required our entire team under ideal circumstances. He turned back to Alexandra. That's what real operators do, Lieutenant. They complete the mission, even when the plan falls apart. The validation was unexpected but welcome. Alexandra maintained her professional demeanor, though she couldn't help noticing the expressions around her. Torres's knowing smile, the newfound respect in the eyes of the other team members, and West's barely contained fury. Thank you, sir, she said simply. Peterson nodded. Don't think this means you're off the hook for disobeying a direct order. There will be paperwork, lots of it. The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. But I suspect headquarters will be more interested in how one sniper managed to disable 7 vehicles and capture a high-value target than in why she left her observation post. As the sun crested the eastern mountains, bathing the valley in golden light, Alexandra felt a weight lift from her shoulders, not just from the successful mission, but from finally being seen for her abilities rather than her gender. Sergeant Torres approached as she was securing her equipment for transport. That was some shooting, Phantom, he said, using her call sign with new respect. I counted the shell casings. 13 shots, 13 hits. At night, from nearly 2 kilometers. Alexandra shrugged. Conditions were favorable. Torres laughed. Yeah, and I'm just okay at communications. He sobered slightly. You know West is going to make your life hell after this, right? His ego can't handle being shown up. West's ego isn't my concern, she replied, closing her rifle case. Never has been. Fair enough. Torres hesitated before adding, You've changed things with what you did here. Not just for yourself, but for others coming up behind you. Alexandra hadn't thought about it that way. Throughout her career, she'd focused on proving herself through competence and results, not as a trailblazer for other women. But looking around at the operation she'd salvaged, the captured target, the disabled convoy, the newfound respect in her teammates' eyes, she understood what Torres meant. Sometimes change came from official policies and grand pronouncements. Other times, it came from a single shot in the darkness, fired by someone who refused to be limited by others' expectations. As Echo Team prepared to move out, Alexandra took one last look at the valley where she'd made her stand. The morning light revealed details hidden by darkness, the steep slope she'd navigated alone, the disabled convoy now appearing small and vulnerable in the vast landscape, the precise trajectory her bullets had traveled to change the course of the mission. Major Peterson approached as she was loading her gear. Headquarters is sending extraction. Bird will be here in 20. They're rather eager to debrief the team that captured Farid Nazari. Alexandra nodded, recognizing the name of the terrorist, leader responsible for the Karachi bombing and countless other atrocities. Sir, about leaving my post. Peterson held up a hand. Captain, in special operations, we select individuals who can think beyond their immediate orders when circumstances change. If I wanted someone who blindly followed instructions regardless of the situation, I'd have requested a regular infantry unit. He glanced toward the prisoner being loaded into one of their vehicles. The mission was to capture Nazari. You completed that mission when no one else could have. It was as close to an apology as she was likely to get for being sidelined in The first place, Alexandra accepted it with a nod. That said, Peterson continued, next time you're about to engage an enemy convoy alone, try a little harder to reach your commanding officer first. Yes, sir, she replied, allowing herself a small smile. I'll make that a priority. As the helicopter approached, its rhythmic thumping echoing through the valley, Alexandra felt a sense of vindication that went beyond this single operation. Every barrier she'd faced, every dismissal she'd endured, every time she'd been told to stay behind, all of it had prepared her for this moment, when staying behind had placed her exactly where she needed to be. The rest of Echo Team had given her a wide berth during preparations, processing their own reactions to how completely their perceptions had been upended. Only Torres treated her normally, discussing extraction protocols as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Lieutenant West made one final attempt to reassert his authority as they prepared to board the helicopter. Captain Morgan, he said, his voice carrying just enough to be heard over the rotowash, I'll be filing a supplementary report about your actions today. Chain of command exists for a reason. Alexandra met his gaze evenly. Feel free, Lieutenant. I'm confident the results speak for themselves. Before West could respond, Peterson intervened. West, you'll be riding with the prisoner detail. Morgan, you're with me in the lead bird. The lieutenant's face flushed, but he offered a crisp, yes, sir, before moving toward the second helicopter. The matter wasn't settled. Alexandra knew that men like West didn't relinquish power or privilege easily, but it was a clear signal of how the wind was blowing. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying them away from the valley that had just become part of Special Operations lore, Alexandra gazed down at the disabled convoy, visible evidence of what one person could accomplish when skill, determination, and opportunity converged. They had ordered her to stay behind, never imagining that her position, combined with her exceptional abilities, would place her at the perfect point to save the mission when everything went sideways. Sometimes being left behind wasn't a limitation. Sometimes it was exactly where you needed to be to change everything with a single perfect shot. 2 weeks after the Nazari operation, the debriefings had finally concluded. Alexandra sat in a quiet corner of the base cafeteria, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold while she reviewed the after-action reports. The official commendation had come through that morning, along with notification that she was being reassigned. The empty chair across from her scraped against the floor as Major Peterson sat down without invitation. Enjoying your newfound celebrity status, Captain. Alexandra closed the folder. Hardly, sir. I've spent more time explaining my decision-making process to intelligence analysts than I did actually making those decisions. Peterson's laugh was short but genuine. Welcome to success in special operations. The more effective you are, the more people want to dissect how you did it. He slid a sealed envelope across the table. Your new orders. Effective immediately. Alexandra took the envelope but didn't open it. May I ask where I'm going, sir? Fort Branham. Special Operations Training Command. Peterson watched her carefully. They want you to develop a long-range interdiction program. Apparently, headquarters thinks your methods should be taught to others. Alexandra sat very still, processing the implications. Fort Branham was the premier training facility for special operators. A posting there meant her techniques would influence an entire generation of snipers. It was the kind of opportunity that came once in a career, if ever. I'm honored, sir. But you'd rather stay with Echo Team, Peterson finished for her. I figured as much. That's why I fought the transfer. He leaned back, crossing his arms. I lost. Alexandra nodded, understanding the politics at play. After the Nazari operation, she had become too visible to remain in the shadows of operational teams. The brass wanted to capitalize on her success by putting her in a position where she could multiply her impact. When do I leave? Transportation's arranged for 0600 tomorrow. Peterson's expression softened slightly. For what it's worth, I think it's the right move. Not just for the service, but for you. Sir, you changed the game out there. Morgan single-handedly adapted to mission failure and turned it into success. But there are a lot of people who aren't comfortable with what that represents. He glanced around the nearly empty cafeteria. Lieutenant West's father being one of them. Understanding dawned. I'm being promoted to remove me from the field. Peterson shrugged. Politics and special operations have always been uncomfortable bedfellows. Deputy Director West can't publicly object to your commendation without looking petty, but he can ensure you're placed somewhere his son doesn't have to be reminded of being outperformed. By a woman, Alexandra added quietly. By anyone, Peterson corrected. But yes, that particular detail doesn't help. He stood, preparing to leave. The training command assignment isn't a punishment, Morgan. It's an opportunity to change the culture from the inside out. Teach them what you know, how you think. The next generation won't have the same blind spots as ours. After Peterson left, Alexandra finally opened the envelope. The orders were, as he had described, immediate transfer to Fort Branham to develop and implement a specialized training program for long-range interdiction operations. Reading between the lines, she understood both the opportunity and the challenge. She would be the first woman to hold a senior instructor position in the Special Operations Training Command, a role that would place her squarely in the crosshairs of those who believed women had no place in combat operations. The following morning, Alexandra departed with minimal ceremony. Torres and a few others from Echo Team showed up to see her off, but Lieutenant West was conspicuously absent. His parting gift had been a formal letter of protest regarding her actions during the Nazari operation, filed but ultimately dismissed by command. The flight to Fort Branham took just under 3 hours. Alexandra spent the time reviewing the facility's training protocols, identifying outdated methodologies and potential areas for improvement. By the time the plane touched down, she had filled a notebook with observations and preliminary course outlines. A staff sergeant met her at the airfield. Captain Morgan? I'm Sergeant Miller. Colonel Hayes sent me to escort you to headquarters. Alexandra nodded, gathering her gear. How long have you been at Branham, Sergeant? 4 years, ma'am. I work with the Advanced Marksmanship Division. Perfect. I'll have questions about the existing program. Miller seemed surprised by her directness but quickly recovered. Yes, ma'am. Though I should warn you, the current instructors are traditional in their methods. Alexandra smiled slightly at the diplomatic phrasing. I imagine they are. The drive to headquarters provided a tour of the sprawling training facility, firing ranges extending to the horizon, urban combat simulators, rappelling towers, and obstacle courses designed to break the strongest candidates. Fort Branham represented the pinnacle of special operations training, where the elite became even more elite through brutal conditioning and uncompromising standards. Colonel Hayes was waiting when they arrived, a tall, weathered man whose ramrod posture spoke of decades in uniform. His office walls displayed a lifetime of service, photographs with presidents and foreign dignitaries, shadows boxes containing medals and insignia, maps marked with operation locations spanning multiple conflicts. Captain Morgan, he said, extending his hand, your reputation precedes you. Thank you, sir, Alexandra replied, noting his carefully neutral tone. I hope to live up to it. Hayes gestured for her to sit. Let's discuss why you're here. The Nazari operation has created quite a stir at the highest levels. One soldier effectively neutralizing an enemy convoy and capturing a high-value target alone. It's unprecedented in recent operations. It was a unique situation, sir. Indeed. Hayes studied her for a moment. Some would say impossibly unique. There are those who believe the reports have been embellished for political purposes. Alexandra kept her expression neutral despite the implication. The after-action documentation includes gun camera footage from our support helicopters. Sir, the results speak for themselves. Hayes nodded slowly. So they do. Which is why, despite considerable reservation from certain quarters, you're sitting in my office instead of being quietly reassigned to a desk job. He leaned forward. I'll be direct, Captain. I didn't request you for this position. That came from 2 levels above me. But now that you're here, I expect you to perform to the exceptional standards you demonstrated in the field. I understand, sir. Do you? Hayes raised an eyebrow. You're about to walk into a hornet's nest. The instructors at this facility have decades of combined combat experience. Many have multiple confirmed kills in the harshest conditions imaginable. They won't appreciate being told how to teach their craft by someone they view as a political appointment. Alexandra met his gaze evenly. With respect, sir, I'm not here to tell anyone how to teach. I'm here to develop a program that incorporates modern interdiction techniques proven effective in actual operations. If that challenges existing methods, so be it. A ghost of a smile crossed Hayes's face. Well said. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Report to Training Center Bravo at 0700 tomorrow. You'll meet your instructor Kadri and outline your program objectives. I suggest you come prepared for resistance. Always, sir. Alexandra spent the remainder of the day settling into her assigned quarters and reviewing personnel files for the instructors she would be working with. The profiles painted a predictable picture, all male, all with extensive combat experience, all products of the very system they now perpetuated. Their collective expertise was impressive, but their documented resistance to methodological change was concerning. Chief among them was Master Sergeant James Blackwood, the lead sniper instructor with over 20 years of experience and a reputation for unwavering adherence to traditional techniques. His file included multiple commendations for combat effectiveness, but also notes about his opposition to recent changes in training doctrine. If anyone would resist her program, it would be Blackwood. Morning arrived with military precision. Alexandra dressed in standard utilities, deliberately avoiding any insignia or badges that might appear as if she was flaunting her achievements. Her approach would be professional and understated, letting her knowledge speak rather than her. Decorations. Training Center Bravo housed the Advanced Marksmanship Program, a sprawling complex of indoor ranges, simulation facilities, and classrooms dedicated to turning competent shooters into exceptional ones. Alexandra arrived 15 minutes early, using the time to familiarize herself with the layout and equipment. At precisely 0700, she entered the main briefing room where 6 men waited with varying expressions of curiosity, skepticism, and poorly concealed hostility. Colonel Hayes stood at the head of the conference table, making introductions unnecessary. Gentlemen, this is Captain Alexandra Morgan. By now you've all heard about the Nazari operation and the reason for her assignment here. Captain Morgan will be developing our new long-range interdiction program, incorporating techniques that proved successful in the field. Hayes glanced around the room. I expect your full cooperation in this endeavor. The message was clear, though Alexandra doubted it would prevent the resistance Hayes had warned her about. The colonel departed, leaving Alexandra facing 6 instructors whose combined experience represented over a century of special operations deployments. At the far end of the table sat Master Sergeant Blackwood, his weathered face impassive as he studied her. Alexandra moved to the front of the room, setting her materials on the table with deliberate calm. Before we begin, I want to address what I suspect most of you are thinking. I didn't request this assignment, nor do I believe my methods are inherently superior to techniques that have proven effective for decades. She paused, making eye contact with each man. What I do believe is that our enemies are adapting their tactics, which means we must adapt ours. The program I'm developing isn't meant to replace existing training, but to augment it with approaches that have demonstrated effectiveness against contemporary threats. Blackwood spoke first, his deep voice carrying the weight of his experience. With respect, Captain, one successful operation doesn't validate a methodology. Special operations function on consistently reproducible results, not one-off achievements. Several of the other instructors nodded in agreement. "You're absolutely right, Master Sergeant," Alexandra replied, surprising them with her concurrence. "Which is why I'm not proposing we rebuild the program based solely on the Nazari operation. What I am proposing is that we examine why that approach succeeded when traditional methods would have failed, and determine if there are elements worth incorporating into our training." She activated the room's display screen, showing a topographical map of the valley where she had intercepted the convoy. The situation required adaptation to rapidly changing conditions with minimal support and compromised communications. Those are increasingly common elements in modern operations, particularly against non-state actors who don't follow conventional movement patterns. For the next hour, Alexandra outlined her preliminary thoughts on program development, not as a replacement for existing methods, but as an evolution that accounted for changing operational realities. She emphasized adaptability, independent decision-making, and integration of multiple skills beyond pure marksmanship. Throughout her presentation, she deliberately referenced the instructor's own combat experiences, demonstrating that she had studied their records and respected their expertise. It was a subtle but important acknowledgement that she wasn't there to dismiss their contributions, but to build upon them. When she finished, the room was quieter than when she had begun. The open hostility had faded from most faces, replaced by thoughtful consideration, or at minimum, reduced skepticism. Only Blackwood remained outwardly unmoved. "Questions?" Alexandra asked. One of the younger instructors, Staff Sergeant Rivera, leaned forward. "Your approach emphasizes psychological factors more heavily than our current methodology. How do you propose we evaluate those elements objectively?" It was a legitimate question, asked without the defensiveness that had permeated the room earlier. "Through scenario-based assessments with controlled variables," Alexandra explained. "We establish baseline performance metrics under standard conditions, then systematically introduce complications, communications failure, weather degradation, intelligence gaps, and measure adaptability against those baselines." Rivera nodded, satisfied with the answer. Another instructor raised concerns about scaling her approach for larger training groups. Alexandra acknowledged the challenge but outlined potential solutions, involving tiered instruction and peer-to-peer mentoring protocols. Throughout the discussion, Blackwood remained silent, observing the gradual shift in the room's dynamics. Only when the conversation began winding down did he finally speak again. "Captain Morgan," he said, his tone carefully neutral, "you've presented a thoughtful framework for program enhancement. However, there's a significant gap between theoretical methodology and practical application." He leaned forward slightly. "I propose a demonstration before we proceed further." The tension in the room returned instantly. Everyone present understood what Blackwood was suggesting, a direct comparison of her skills against the established standard he represented. "What kind of demonstration did you have in mind, Master Sergeant?" Alexandra asked, though she already knew the answer. "A practical evaluation. You and I, on the advanced course. Standard qualification parameters with progressive difficulty modifiers." Blackwood's expression remained professional, but the challenge was unmistakable. "If we're to incorporate new methodologies, we should verify their effectiveness firsthand." The other instructors exchanged glances. What Blackwood proposed wasn't unprecedented. New instructors were often tested by their peers, but the implicit public challenge to her competence was unusual, particularly given her combat record. Alexandra considered her options. Refusing would undermine her position before she had even begun developing the program. Accepting meant putting her reputation on the line in a controlled environment designed around traditional methodologies that Blackwood had mastered over decades. "I think that's an excellent suggestion," she replied calmly. "When would you like to conduct this evaluation?" If her ready acceptance surprised Blackwood, he didn't show it. 1,400 hours today. The full instructor cadre will observe. "I look forward to it," Alexandra said with a slight smile. It's always valuable to learn from experienced practitioners. The subtle emphasis on learn wasn't lost on anyone in the room. She had accepted his challenge while reframing it as a collaborative exercise rather than a competition, a small but important distinction that shifted the narrative. As the meeting broke up, Rivera approached her. "Just so you know, Captain, Blackwood hasn't been outshot on that course in 15 years. Not even by the teams rotating back from deployment." Alexandra nodded. "I appreciate the information, Sergeant. Any other insights you'd care to share?" Rivera glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "He'll push for environmental complications, wind machines, strobe effects, the works. Says it simulates combat conditions, but really it's where he excels compared to most shooters." "Sounds like valuable training elements," Alexandra replied. "I look forward to experiencing them firsthand." The afternoon arrived with the heavy anticipation that preceded any significant demonstration in special operations circles. Word had spread beyond the instructor cadre. Various training staff and even a few senior officers had found reasons to be near the advanced marksmanship range at the appointed time. Alexandra arrived early, using the time to familiarize herself with the layout. The course was impressive, multiple firing positions at varying distances, with target systems that could simulate movement patterns and partial concealment. Environmental controls allowed instructors to introduce complications ranging from simulated precipitation to variable lighting conditions. Blackwood arrived precisely at 1400, accompanied by the other instructors and Colonel Hayes, whose presence elevated the demonstration from a professional courtesy to an official evaluation. "Captain Morgan," Hayes said by way of greeting, "Master Sergeant Blackwood informs me you've agreed to a practical demonstration of the methodologies you're proposing to incorporate into our training program." "Yes, sir," Alexandra replied. "I believe it will provide valuable context for our program development discussions." Hayes nodded. "Very well. Standard qualification protocol with progressive modifiers. Master Sergeant Blackwood will establish the baseline as current lead instructor, followed by your demonstration." The evaluation began with Blackwood taking position at the first firing point. His movements were economical and precise, reflecting thousands of hours of practice. He settled behind his rifle, a custom-built precision system that represented the pinnacle of current military marksmanship technology. What followed was a masterclass in traditional sniper methodology. Blackwood engaged targets from 300 to 1,200 meters with methodical precision, his breathing controlled, his timing impeccable. Even when the range officers introduced complications, variable winds from industrial fans, strobe lighting to simulate muzzle flashes from enemy positions, his performance remained consistent and impressive. When he completed the course, the display showed a 94% hit rate across all distance categories with an average engagement time of 4.2 seconds per target. It was an exceptional demonstration that would have intimidated most shooters. Alexandra prepared her station as Blackwood stepped away from the firing line. She could feel the weight of observation from everyone present, not just evaluating her performance, but looking for any sign of nervousness or uncertainty. "Same parameters, Captain," Hayes called from the observation position. "Beginning on your ready." Alexandra settled behind her rifle, a standard issue model rather than the customized system Blackwood had used. The choice was deliberate. She wanted to demonstrate that her methodology wasn't dependent on specialized equipment that might not be available in the field. She took a moment to center herself, using the same mental preparation technique she had employed during the Nazari operation. Then she signaled her readiness. What followed wasn't just a demonstration of marksmanship, but a fundamentally different approach to the entire process. Where Blackwood had been methodical and precise, Alexandra introduced a fluidity that hadn't been present in his performance. Her transitions between targets were seamless, her adaptations to changing conditions almost instantaneous. When the environmental modifiers were introduced, the same wind and lighting complications that Blackwood had faced, Alexandra didn't simply compensate for them. She incorporated them into her approach, sometimes using the variable conditions to enhance rather than hinder her effectiveness. Most notably, she maintained situational awareness beyond the immediate targets, constantly scanning and assessing the entire range, a habit developed through operations where threats could emerge from unexpected directions. It was this holistic approach, rather than pure marksmanship skill, that distinguished her methodology from traditional techniques. When she completed the course, the display showed a 96% hit rate with an average engagement time of 3.8 seconds. The numbers told only part of the story. It was the qualitative difference in approach that had captured everyone's attention. The range fell silent as Alexandra secured her weapon and stood. Colonel Hayes approached, his expression thoughtful. "Impressive demonstration, Captain," he said. "Though I notice your approach deviated significantly from standard protocols." "In several key areas." "Yes, sir," Alexandra acknowledged. "Traditional methodologies emphasize mechanical precision and sequential engagement. My approach incorporates elements from dynamic combat environments where conditions rarely remain static long enough for textbook application." Hayes nodded slowly. "The results speak for themselves." He turned to Blackwood, whose expression remained carefully neutral. "Your assessment, Master Sergeant?" Blackwood studied Alexandra for a long moment before responding. "The captain's technique is unorthodox, but effective." It was a significant concession from someone who had dedicated his career to traditional methodologies. "I'd be interested in understanding the principles behind certain elements of her approach." It wasn't enthusiastic endorsement, but it was professional acknowledgement, perhaps the most Alexandra could have hoped for from someone whose expertise she had just challenged. "I believe that's the purpose of Captain Morgan's assignment," Hayes said. "To incorporate these principles into our training program where appropriate." He addressed the entire instructor cadre. "Gentlemen, I expect your full cooperation in this development process. The purpose of this command is to produce the most effective operators possible, not to preserve methodological tradition for its own sake." As the group dispersed, Alexandra noticed the shift in how the instructors regarded her. The outright skepticism had been replaced by professional curiosity, even from those who had been most resistant initially. She had earned their attention, if not yet their complete respect. Blackwood approached as she was packing her equipment. "Your second and third transitions during the moving target sequence," he said without preamble. "You anticipated direction changes before the system indicators activated." Alexandra nodded. "Pattern recognition. The system uses algorithmic progressions with limited randomization. After the first 3 movements, the pattern becomes predictable if you're looking for it." Blackwood considered this. "No one's identified that before. Most shooters focus on the target to the exclusion of everything else," Alexandra explained. "It's effective for range qualification, but creates tunnel vision that can be fatal in actual operations. Like focusing on an expected convoy route while the actual target approaches from another direction," Blackwood said, referencing the Nazari operation. "Exactly." Alexandra appreciated that he had made the connection himself. Excellence in marksmanship is essential, but situational awareness and adaptability often determine mission success when conditions degrade. Blackwood nodded slowly. "Your program proposal mentioned integration of these elements." I'd be interested in reviewing your training methodology in more detail. It wasn't an endorsement or even agreement, but it was an opening, a willingness to consider approaches beyond the traditional methods he had spent decades perfecting. For Alexandra, it represented the first real opportunity to influence the system from within. I'd welcome your input, Master Sergeant. Your experience would be invaluable in developing practical applications. As they walked toward the administrative building, Alexandra reflected on the day's developments. The challenge had been inevitable, perhaps even necessary. In special operations, respect wasn't granted through assignment or rank but earned through demonstrated competence under observation by those who had already proven themselves. Today she had passed the first test, not by proving herself superior, but by demonstrating enough value to warrant consideration. The real work, transforming that initial opening into lasting change, was just beginning. They had ordered her to stay behind during the mission that made her reputation. Now she was being asked to step forward and shape the future of special operations training. In both cases, the key had been the same: performing with excellence when given the opportunity, regardless of the circumstances or expectations. Sometimes the path forward began with a single perfect shot, and sometimes it continued with the patience to help others see what was possible beyond the limitations of tradition. 3 months into her assignment at Fort Branham, Alexandra's long-range interdiction program was taking shape. What had begun as skepticism from the instructor cadre had evolved into cautious collaboration, with even the most traditional trainers contributing insights to the developing curriculum. The morning found her in the simulation center, observing. As Master Sergeant Blackwood guided a trainee through a complex scenario. "Identify your target priorities," Blackwood instructed, his voice carrying the calm authority that had made him a legendary instructor. "Remember Captain Morgan's situational assessment protocol: environmental factors first, then potential threat vectors, then target acquisition." Alexandra suppressed a smile at hearing her methodology referenced so naturally. The integration hadn't been seamless. There had been resistance, heated debates, and moments when she questioned whether meaningful change was possible within such an entrenched system. But gradually, demonstrably superior results had won over even the staunchest traditionalists. "Captain," Staff Sergeant Rivera approached with a tablet in hand, "the new environmental simulation parameters you requested are ready for testing." "Thank you, Sergeant. Let's run them after Master Sergeant Blackwood completes this session." The doors to the simulation center swung open, admitting Colonel Hayes accompanied by a man Alexandra didn't recognize, a civilian in an expensive suit that screamed Washington as clearly as any uniform. "Captain Morgan," Hayes called, his tone carrying a note of formality that hadn't been present in their recent interactions. "A moment of your time." Alexandra excused herself and crossed to where Hayes waited. The colonel's expression was unreadable, but the tension in his posture suggested something significant was happening. "Sir," she acknowledged, then nodded to the visitor. "Good morning. Captain Morgan, this is Mr. Donovan from the Secretary's office," Hayes introduced. "He's here to observe our program development." Alexandra recognized the implications immediately. Visitors from the Secretary's office didn't appear for routine training observation. Either their program had attracted high-level attention, or something had gone wrong politically. "Mr. Donovan," she greeted him professionally. "Welcome to Fort Branham." Donovan studied her with the calculated assessment of someone accustomed to evaluating personnel for specific qualities. "Captain Morgan, your reputation has generated considerable interest in certain circles. I hope that interest translates to support for our training initiatives," she replied diplomatically. "That remains to be determined." Donovan glanced around the simulation center. "I understand you've been making significant changes to established protocols." "Enhancements rather than changes," Alexandra corrected gently. "We're integrating proven field techniques with traditional fundamentals." Hayes intervened smoothly. Perhaps a demonstration would provide better context than a discussion. Mr. Donovan, Captain Morgan's team is preparing to test new simulation parameters this morning. Donovan nodded. I'd appreciate seeing these innovations firsthand. As Hayes led Donovan to the observation area, Alexandra caught Blackwood's eye across the room. The Master Sergeant had been in the military long enough to recognize a political inspection when he saw one. He gave her a subtle nod, silent acknowledgement that the entire instructor cadre understood the stakes of this unexpected visit. Alexandra gathered her team quickly, outlining the situation in concise terms. We have a visitor from the Secretary's office observing today. Let's demonstrate the integration protocol we've been developing, the multi-environmental progressive scenario with communications degradation. That's our most complex simulation, Rivera noted. We haven't fully tested all parameters, which makes it the perfect demonstration of our approach, Alexandra replied. Adaptability under uncertain conditions is precisely what separates our methodology from traditional training. The team dispersed to prepare while Alexandra briefed Donovan on what he was about to observe. The scenario simulates a situation where an operator must adapt to rapidly changing environmental conditions while experiencing progressive communications failure. It tests not just marksmanship but decision-making under stress, and this differs from standard training. How exactly? Donovan asked. Traditional training isolates skills, marksmanship separate from communications, separate from environmental adaptation. Our approach integrates these elements, requiring simultaneous mastery rather than sequential application. Donovan seemed skeptical. Sounds complicated. Complexity often reduces reliability in field operations. With respect, sir, modern combat environments are inherently complex. Training that doesn't reflect that reality produces operators unprepared for actual conditions. Before Donovan could respond, Blackwood approached. Captain, the simulation is ready. Would you like me to run the demonstration? Alexandra considered for a moment. Having Blackwood, the most respected traditional instructor, demonstrate her methodology would send a powerful message about program integration and instructor buy-in. Please do, Master Sergeant. Blackwood nodded and moved to the simulation area. The room darkened as the advanced projection systems activated, transforming the space into a photorealistic combat environment, a mountain pass eerily similar to the one where Alexandra had intercepted Nazari's convoy. Donovan leaned closer to Alexandra. Interesting choice of scenario location. The terrain provides optimal challenges for demonstrating adaptive techniques, she replied neutrally, though they both knew the psychological impact of the setting was intentional. Blackwood began the demonstration with methodical precision, working through the integrated protocol Alexandra had developed. As the simulation progressed, environmental conditions deteriorated, visibility reduced, wind patterns became erratic, and communications began failing in a cascading pattern that required constant adaptation. What was most remarkable wasn't Blackwood's technical proficiency, which had never been in question, but how seamlessly he incorporated elements that would have been considered unorthodox just months earlier. His situational awareness expanded beyond immediate targets. His decision-making reflected the holistic approach Alexandra had championed, and his adaptations to changing conditions demonstrated the fluid responsiveness that had distinguished her own operational style. When the simulation concluded, even Donovan appeared impressed. Remarkable integration of multiple disciplines, he acknowledged. Though I question whether average operators could master such a complex approach. That's precisely why we're developing this program, Alexandra explained. Not to replace existing training, but to provide advanced integration for operators who have already mastered fundamentals. The special operations community needs personnel who can function effectively when systems fail and conditions deteriorate beyond textbook parameters. Donovan nodded slowly. The Secretary will be interested in your progress, He turned to Hayes. "I'd like to review the program metrics and implementation timeline." As Hayes led Donovan away, Blackwood approached Alexandra. "Political complications?" he asked quietly. "Most likely," she confirmed. "That wasn't a routine observation visit." Blackwood's expression hardened slightly. "Someone's questioning the program, or my leadership of it," Alexandra added. Years in the male-dominated special operations community had taught her to recognize when her position was being challenged. For reasons beyond professional merit. "Your methodology speaks for itself," Blackwood stated firmly. "The improvements in operator performance are objectively measurable." The Master Sergeant's support was significant, a validation from someone whose reputation was beyond reproach in the special operations community. 3 months earlier, he had been her most formidable skeptic. Now he stood as perhaps her strongest advocate. "I appreciate that, Master Sergeant. But we both know military decisions aren't always based solely on effectiveness." The remainder of the day proceeded with the heightened awareness that came from high-level scrutiny. Donovan observed several more demonstrations, reviewed program documentation, and interviewed instructors individually, a thoroughness that suggested more than casual interest in their development process. By late afternoon, Alexandra was summoned to Colonel Hayes's office, where Donovan waited with an expression that revealed nothing of his conclusions. "Captain Morgan," Hayes began formally. "It's a backdoor that bypasses the entire bureaucracy. Prove the methodology where it matters most, and the rest of the community will demand access regardless of what Fort Kerrigan develops." Alexandra studied him, recognizing that Rivera represented the younger generation of instructors, those who valued effectiveness over tradition and results over politics. And the instructor cadre? Would they support such a move? Rivera smiled slightly. "Half of us have already approached Blackwood about following if you agree. We believe in what you're building, Captain. Not because it's yours, but because we've seen the results." The declaration was unexpected, but profoundly validating. These instructors, career special operators with impeccable credentials, were willing to risk their professional standing to support a methodology they believed in, regardless of institutional resistance. "I appreciate your candor, Sergeant," Alexandra said. "And your support." After Rivera departed, Alexandra remained on the observation deck, watching as training continued across the facility, operators honing skills that would determine mission success or failure in the world's most dangerous environments. The stakes extended far beyond her personal career trajectory or professional validation. Every improvement in methodology, every innovation in training approach, every enhancement to operator effectiveness translated directly to lives saved. Both those of the operators themselves and the innocent civilians they were often deployed to protect. The political maneuvering that threatened to dilute her program wasn't just professionally frustrating. It potentially compromised that fundamental mission. If Task Force 88 offered an alternative path to implementation, one that preserved the methodology's integrity, didn't she have an obligation to pursue it? By sunrise the following morning, Alexandra had made her decision. She found Blackwood at the range as promised, methodically working with a trainee on advanced wind calculation techniques. "Master Sergeant," she said as the session concluded, "I'd like to discuss the Task Force 88 opportunity in more detail." Blackwood nodded, dismissing the trainee before turning his full attention to Alexandra. "You've decided?" "I have questions." "First," she replied, "what exactly did they request?" "Not just an instructor, but a specific capability. Direct interdiction training with emphasis on adaptive response under degraded conditions," Blackwood quoted from memory, specifically citing the integrated methodology demonstrated during the Nazari operation and subsequently developed here. Alexandra nodded. The request aligned perfectly with their program focus. "And the development team you mentioned, what parameters were discussed?" 3 to 5 personnel with complete methodological authority, reporting directly to the task force commander rather than through traditional training command structures. Blackwood's expression remained neutral, but there was a gleam in his eyes that suggested he recognized the significance of this arrangement. No committees, no bureaucratic review process. Just development, implementation, and results-based assessment. It was the ideal scenario for preserving their approach: small team, direct reporting, and operational implementation rather than theoretical development. The only question remaining was whether Alexandra was willing to abandon the institutional influence she had begun to establish at Fort Branham for the more focused impact this opportunity represented. "If I agree," she said carefully, "I'd want Rivera and Chun on the development team. They understand the integration principles and have the operational experience to translate theory into practical application." Blackwood nodded. "Already discussed it with them. They're prepared to transfer if you approve." The pieces were falling into place with a precision that suggested Blackwood had been developing this contingency plan for some time, perhaps from the moment he recognized the political vulnerabilities of their program. "What about Colonel Hayes?" Alexandra asked. "This would effectively undermine his authority to transfer the program to Fort Kerrigan." "Hayes suggested this approach," Blackwood revealed. "He's been in the system long enough to recognize when bureaucracy is about to smother innovation. His official position will be disappointment at losing key personnel, but he'll approve the transfers." Alexandra considered the full picture, not just the opportunity to preserve their methodology, but the broader implications for her career and the institutional change she had hoped to create. Task Force 88 offered implementation at the highest operational level, but removed her from the position to influence system-wide training development. "When do they need our decision?" she asked. "Tomorrow at the latest," Blackwood replied. "They're deploying in 3 weeks and want the training program established before the next rotation." Alexandra nodded slowly. "Tell them we accept. Begin processing the transfer paperwork for Rivera and Chun." She paused before adding, "And notify anyone else from the instructor cadre who wants to join the development team. We'll take the best candidates up to the 5-person limit." Blackwood's expression shifted into the closest thing to a smile she had seen from him. "Already done, Captain. Just waiting on your authorization." As they walked back toward the administrative building to formalize the arrangements, Alexandra reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. From being ordered to stay behind during the Nazari operation to creating a methodology that elite units now specifically requested, each challenge had become a stepping stone rather than a barrier. The path hadn't been direct or easy, but each obstacle had forced her to demonstrate precisely the qualities her methodology emphasized: adaptability, situational awareness, and the willingness to find alternative approaches when traditional methods failed. They had ordered her to stay behind, never imagining that position would allow her to change the entire operational paradigm with a single, perfect shot. Now political maneuvering had attempted to sideline her again, not realizing that the alternative path might lead to even more significant impact where it mattered most. Sometimes the most effective position wasn't the most obvious one. Sometimes being forced to find another way revealed opportunities that would otherwise remain undiscovered. And sometimes a leader's most important quality wasn't authority or rank, but the ability to recognize when the mission's success required following an unexpected path, even when that path led away from conventional advancement and institutional recognition. Alexandra had taken her shot when ordered to stay behind. Now she would do it again, stepping away from the institutional battlefield to implement change where it would directly save lives. In both cases, the principle remained the same: mission effectiveness above all else, regardless of personal recognition or career advancement. That was the true lesson she had been teaching all along. 18 months after joining Task Force 88, Alexandra stood in the shadows of the operations center, watching as teams prepared for a mission that would test everything they had developed. The facility hummed with the controlled energy that preceded high-risk deployments, operators checking equipment with methodical precision, intelligence officers reviewing last-minute updates, mission commanders confirming coordination protocols. With supporting elements, Colonel James Barrett, the task force commander, joined her at the observation window. "Your team has transformed our operational capabilities, Captain Morgan," he said quietly. "What they're about to attempt wouldn't have been possible before your training program." Alexandra nodded, watching as Blackwood conducted final briefings with the sniper elements. "They've embraced the methodology completely. The results speak for themselves." The results had indeed been remarkable. In the 18 months since establishing their program within Task Force 88, Alexandra's team had implemented the integrated methodology across all operational elements. The impact was measurable not just in technical proficiency, but in mission success rates, casualty reduction, and the unit's ability to execute increasingly complex operations in environments that would have been considered prohibitively challenging under traditional approaches. "The Joint Chiefs have taken notice," Barrett continued. "Your quarterly assessment metrics have become required reading at the Pentagon. Even General West has stopped criticizing the program." Alexandra suppressed a smile at the mention of her former antagonist. The politics that had threatened to sideline her innovations at Fort Branham had proven irrelevant in the face of demonstrable operational success. Task Force 88's results had created their own momentum, gradually forcing even the most traditional elements of Special Operations Command to acknowledge the effectiveness of her approach. "Success has a way of changing perspectives," she replied diplomatically. Barrett laughed softly. "Politics disguised as principle, until results make the politics untenable." He studied her with the calculating assessment of a commander. "Evaluating potential. The program expansion request has been approved. You'll have authority to implement across 3 additional task forces, with doubled personnel allocation for your development team." The news represented validation beyond anything Alexandra had anticipated when accepting the transfer 18 months earlier. What had begun as a strategic retreat to preserve methodological integrity was now positioning her to influence special operations training across the entire command structure. "That's significant expansion," she observed. "Timeline?" "Immediate. They want implementation underway before the next deployment rotation." Barrett handed her a folder containing the official authorization. "Congratulations, Major Morgan. The promotion comes with the expanded responsibility." The rank advancement caught her by surprise, not because it wasn't merited, but because she had stopped focusing on career progression when choosing mission effectiveness over institutional advancement. "Thank you, sir. I'll begin planning the expansion immediately." As Barrett departed to oversee final mission preparations, Alexandra reviewed the authorization documents. The scope extended far beyond what she had initially envisioned, not just implementing their methodology across additional operational units, but establishing it as the standard approach for all special operations training involving interdiction and adaptive response protocols. In essence, the institutional system that had attempted to sideline her innovations was now mandating their implementation across the entire command structure. Rivera approached as she was reviewing the personnel allocation sections. In the 18 months since transferring to Task Force 88, the former instructor had become her primary implementation specialist, translating theoretical methodologies into practical training protocols. "Expansion approved?" he asked, noticing the documentation. Alexandra nodded. "Across 3 additional task forces, with doubled development personnel," Rivera grinned. "Blackwood called it. He said once the operational metrics reached critical mass, even the bureaucrats couldn't ignore the results." "Speaking of Blackwood, where is he? I need to discuss expansion planning." Final briefing with Team Alpha. They're implementing the adaptive communications protocol for tonight's operation. Alexandra glanced toward the mission preparation area where Team Alpha was conducting equipment checks. The operation scheduled for that night represented the ultimate test of their methodology, a complex interdiction mission in an environment with severely degraded communications and minimal intelligence support. Precisely the type of scenario that traditional approaches considered prohibitively high risk. I'll catch him after the briefing, she decided. Let's meet with Chun to begin mapping expansion requirements. The development team gathered in their designated planning room, an austere space dominated by tactical displays and training documentation. Lieutenant Chun, their technical integration specialist, was already reviewing the expansion authorization when Alexandra arrived. 3 additional task forces, Chun observed, looking up from the documents, plus implementation authority across the entire training command structure. That's significant institutional endorsement, Alexandra nodded. And politically complex. We'll need to navigate resistance from traditional training elements while maintaining methodological integrity. Fort Kerrigan will be the most challenging, Rivera noted, referencing the installation where General West's development team had created a diluted version of their approach. They've invested 18 months in their adaptation of our methodology. They won't simply abandon it for our version. They will if operational results demand it, Blackwood stated as he entered the room, his expression reflecting the professional satisfaction of someone whose judgment had been validated by events. The comparison metrics are undeniable. Alexandra had learned to value Blackwood's blunt pragmatism. Throughout their collaboration, he had maintained a focus on operational effectiveness rather than institutional politics, a perspective that had proven invaluable as they navigated the complex implementation process. We'll need to approach this systematically, she said, activating the room's main display. Rivera, you'll lead implementation for Task Forces 62 and 47. Chun, you'll handle 34 and coordination with Fort Branham's instructor cadre. Blackwood, and I will develop the integration protocols for Fort Kerrigan and headquarters elements. The team nodded, understanding both the opportunity and the challenge this expansion represented. What had begun as a specialized program within a single elite unit was evolving into a fundamental transformation of special operations methodology across the entire command structure. Questions? Alexandra asked, concluding the initial briefing. Implementation timeline? Chun inquired. The authorization indicates immediate, but that's bureaucratic language rather than an operational schedule. 90 days for initial implementation across the additional task forces, Alexandra specified. 6 months for full integration. Throughout the training command structure, we'll prioritize units with imminent deployment schedules. As the team dispersed to begin planning their respective implementation elements, Blackwood remained behind. The Master Sergeant had become more than a colleague over the past 18 months. He had evolved into a trusted advisor whose judgment Alexandra valued above almost anyone else in the special operations community. Something on your mind, Master Sergeant? She asked, recognizing his pensive expression. General West has requested a personal briefing on the expansion protocols. Blackwood replied, his tone carefully neutral. Specifically from you. The request was unexpected and potentially problematic. Throughout the development and implementation of their program, General West had remained a distant adversary, never directly opposing their methodology but consistently supporting alternative approaches developed under his authority at Fort Kerrigan. Interesting timing, Alexandra observed. Just as our approach receives command-wide endorsement. Politics, Blackwood stated simply. He's positioning himself to claim partial credit for the program's success while minimizing his previous opposition. Alexandra considered the implications. When is this briefing scheduled? Tomorrow at headquarters. Just you, no development team representatives. The exclusion of her team was telling. West wanted a private conversation, rather than a technical briefing. The question was whether his intentions were collaborative or confrontational. "I'll be prepared," she assured Blackwood. "In the meantime, let's focus on tonight's operation. Team Alpha is implementing our most advanced protocols in extremely challenging conditions. Their performance will either validate our approach or identify critical gaps." The remainder of the day was consumed with final preparations for Team Alpha's mission, a high-risk interdiction operation targeting a cell leader responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces. The operating environment featured minimal infrastructure, degraded communications capability, and intelligence limitations that would challenge even the most advanced methodologies. From the operations center, Alexandra and her development team monitored the mission's progression through secure communication channels. The integration of their advanced protocols was immediately evident in Team Alpha's approach: adaptive positioning based on environmental conditions, distributed decision-making authority to compensate for communications limitations, and operational flexibility that allowed real-time adjustments to changing circumstances. 4 hours into the mission, the critical moment arrived. Team Alpha's lead elements identified the target compound, but encountered unexpected security measures that compromised their planned approach. Under traditional methodologies, such complications would typically trigger mission abort protocols or requests for additional support assets. Instead, Alexandra watched as the team implemented the adaptive response framework her program had developed, redistributing personnel to create alternative access points, modifying their communications approach to maintain operational coordination. Despite electronic countermeasures and adjusting their interdiction timeline to account for the changed security profile, they're executing a complete tactical adaptation without headquarters consultation, Rivera observed, monitoring the secure feed, exactly as the methodology intended. Blackwood nodded approvingly. Decision-making at the operational level, rather than through command hierarchy. That's the core principle we've been developing. The mission culminated with textbook precision. Team Alpha neutralized the security elements, secured the target individual, and extracted without casualties or collateral damage. The entire operation, despite encountering complications that would have derailed traditional approaches, was completed within the planned operational timeframe. "Complete success," Colonel Barrett announced as he entered the monitoring station. "Preliminary debrief confirms target identity and reports minimal resistance once adaptive protocols were implemented." He turned to Alexandra. "Your methodology just validated itself under the most challenging conditions we deploy to." The success represented more than professional validation. It demonstrated that the integrated approach Alexandra had developed since the Nazari operation genuinely enhanced operational effectiveness in ways that traditional methodologies couldn't match. The implications extended beyond her career, or even the special operations community, to the lives saved through more effective mission execution. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe. And turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.